Introduction to the Foreign Policy. Birth of nation-state. Nation-state is nothing but group of people having same culture, history, ethnicity and language and also having their own political space. Every group of people having distinct language, culture, and ethnically should have their separate territorial space called nation-state. This definition is based on principle of self-determination, which was popularized by Woodrow Wilson in League of Nations Conference in 1919 while delivering his famous 14-point formula for peace. According to Woodrow Wilson, main cause of World War I was denial of state, territorial space, to people having a distinct demand for them based on some identify, culture, language or history. So every people must have option to choose their own state according to principle of self-determination, which sounded fair, just and equitable. However, the time has changed since League of Nations came into existence. Present era is era of globalization and multiculturalism. Globalization has accepted the fact of free flow of goods, services and persons, leading to significant increase in number of migrant persons internationally. This has reduced the need, demand and political utility of self-determination. Migration is such a strong phenomenon where it is not possible to have a monocultural community. Earlier Germany and Hungary were supposed to be monocultural state, but now situation is getting diluted. This trend is further supported by emergence of multicultural society that accepted the societal factor of coexistence of multiple ethnicities without demanding for separate territorial space for each ethnicity. This new trend generated by globalization and multiculturalism is contrary to situation portrayed by principle of self-determination. Moreover, national boundaries have been solidified over the years and power of state has increased exponentially in terms of finance and military. Therefore, due to unprecedented expansion of state machinery, it is practically not very easy for any ethnic group today to force right of self-determination if the state is not willing to allow that. Nation-state as an actor in international politics. Literally, an actor means who takes decision in the international politics, traditionally, starting from 1648. Treaty of Westphalia. When concept of modern sovereign state was born, it gave birth emergence to international law. Thereafter we are witnessing the gradual rise in importance of nation-states as primary actor. This is manifestation of realist theory in international politics. Multilateral organizations. Multinational organization, multinational companies. But we should not consider modern states as only actor. Their international are other actors as well, viz. non-governmental organizations, IGOs, like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch etc. Moreover, in our philanthropist approach, we should not forget the role of other non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and the like in shaping international politics. Non-state actors are challenging and competing with state actors to influence foreign policy. So this situation of transformation is posing a bigger challenge to the traditional nation-state, sovereignty and power. Globalized and multicultural state and its impact on foreign policy making. Majority of states today are part of process of globalization and also the meeting pot of different cultures and identities. This has produced entirely different reactions in policy making, foreign and domestic. In India, for example, we have tremendous amount of diversity in firms of culture, language and ethnicities. People of northeastern part of India, Kashmir, Bengal, Tamil Nadu etc. are having different interest and approach to foreign policy making in India. So the making of foreign policy decisions cannot be a centralized phenomenon. A good policy decision needs to cater genuine aspirations regarding their culture, language and ethnicity. This can be explained best by the recent controversy when Teesta agreement with Bangladesh was delayed because dissent by the Mamata Banerjee, Chief Minister of West Bengal. Tamils of Tamil Nadu have always been a vital component in Indian foreign policy towards Sri Lanka due to problem of rights of ethnic Tamils there. When the Rajiv Gandhi government sent IPKF, Indian Peacekeeping Force, to Sri Lanka in 1987, then, in absence of domestic Tamil support, this policy did not obtain expected results and had to be withdrawn prematurely. Success of a policy depends on consensus and support for policy. Consensus, coordination and collaboration, wherever it is required among people, political elites, bureaucracy, institutions of foreign policy making and media are vital for success of a foreign policy. This is true for a country like India, which is a multi-party parliamentary democracy. In democracy, consensus building is stepping stone to origin of every policy. It may delay the process but very much required to curb centrifugal tendencies operating within country and strengthening the federalism. IR can trace its intellectual roots as far back as the 5th century BC. Many in IR continue to be influenced by Thomas Hobbes' views on anarchy. John Locke's impact on IR and Karl Marx changed the study of political philosophy. The ideas of these political philosophers can be used to analyze various aspects of current events, such as the causes of and potential solutions to the Syrian civil war. Thomas Hobbes claims that all humans are relatively equal in their ability to harm and injure one another. One might be a little stronger and one might be a little quicker. This makes all humans vulnerable to attack by another human in a world without a government. This condition, in which there is no ruler or judge who can resolve disputes and establish security, is called anarchy. In an anarchic world, Hobbes argues that our lives must revolve around survival, leaving no time for agriculture, the arts, sciences, or international relations. In conditions of anarchy, Hobbes says, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The only remedy for this unfortunate situation is the establishment of a government capable of replacing the state of nature with order, a system of rules and laws. It can be best achieved by granting one ruler unqualified political, spiritual, economic and social power over a population. This ruler is primarily responsible for replacing anarchy with order and, in so doing, replacing war with peace. Hobbes' powerful logic, combined with the continuing persistence of war between states, has led many thinkers to embrace fear of anarchy and its effects on human development. According to John Locke, all humans have natural rights to life, liberty and property. These rights predate the formation of governments, so governments must uphold them if they wish to remain legitimate in the eyes of their subjects. Subjects, in turn, consent to government power only when their rights are being protected. Government, according to Locke's theory, is based on a social contract between rulers and their subjects. A government that does not deal with its foundation justly will not survive once its subjects stop recognizing its legitimacy and withdraw the consent from the social contract. Thus, according to Locke, political order must be based on a ruler's respect for the rights of his or her people rather than being something that a ruler imposes unilaterally. In the short term, a ruler might be able to maintain an unjust order through violence and coercion. However, only an order that enjoys the consent of the governed can avoid constant rebellion and thereby remain stable over longer periods of time. According to John Locke, political justice is a precondition for any form of lasting political order. His ideas about the social contract and the responsibilities of rulers towards their subjects have contributed to a number of the theories which drives modern IR, such as liberalism, human rights, cooperation between international actors, etc. Karl Marx interpreted the world through the lens of materialism, the belief that any understanding of political community must be based on the physical and economic conditions in which that community exists. Marx combines materialism and the dialectical approach by focusing on class conflict between modern society's two main socio-economic groups: the bourgeoisie, which controls the way goods are made and distributed, and the proletariat, which sells its labor to the bourgeoisie in return for a small portion of the profits resulting from their work. Wars are fought to access new resources and markets or to protect existing ones. Trade is pursued to benefit bourgeois owners rather than proletarian workers. Governments are tools in the hands of the wealthiest members of society. According to Marx, the laws that they pass are intended to protect their own bourgeois interests against proletarian uprisings at home and against competition from other states' bourgeoisies abroad. His ideas have contributed to our understanding of the world around us. They have shone a light on the role of economic actors, including transnational companies, TNC, international affairs. Marx's ideas also resonate with analysts looking at the relationship between the industrialized core of the global economy and its much poorer periphery. While the former produces high-value goods and services, the latter is largely limited to producing low-value raw materials that are supplied to industrial interests located in or owned by bourgeois members of core economies. This reinforces the periphery's secondary status in the world capitalist system. creating a widening gap between the richest and poorest citizens of the world and leads to economic and political crises. The study of international relations takes a wide range of theoretical approaches. Some emerge from within the discipline itself. Others have been imported, in whole or in part, from disciplines such as economics or sociology. Determinants of foreign policy. Those factors that influence and determine the foreign policy of a country are its determinants. Both of these factors are static or of unchanging nature, whereas others are in a state of flux and their dynamics are continually adjusted to the changing circumstances. External determinants. 1. Power structure. The relations that nations establish among themselves are backed by their respective national interests and powers. In fact, such relations involve struggle for power among them. The net effect is that international relations constitute a power structure in which the more powerful nations, the superpowers and the major powers, play a more vigorous and leading role than the relatively less powerful nations. The power vacuum caused by the weakened power of the formerly powerful European states, because of their involvement in 2 world wars, compelled the USA to come out of its isolationism and assume relations. A new global role in international, the emergence of the USA and the USSR as the 2 superpowers with Cold War in between them, made it imperative for the newly independent states like India to adopt a policy of keeping away from the Cold War and yet attempt to have friendly cooperation with both the superpowers. 2. International organizations. The role and importance of international institutions, instruments of states' foreign policies, and the political, military, functional, economic and as humanitarian roles played principally by the United Nations in international relations cannot be overestimated. These international organizations to varying degrees serve as modifiers of state behavior and as independent actors in their own right. They have profound impact on the determination of the foreign policy of a state. No state can decide and conduct its policy arbitrarily to the detriment of other states. UN and other multilateral forums come to the rescue of the aggressed state. Usually sanctions are imposed, which in some cases become very effective provided the international community imposes them sincerely. 3. Reaction of other states. Likewise, the system of states is fast transforming into a society of states state where each and every individual state has regard for the rights of other states. Being sensible to the sensibilities of other states, no state can adopt a unilateral policy. It has to take into account, and accommodate, if possible, the interests of the other stakeholders as well. India and the US have to take stock of Pakistani interests in Afghanistan. They are also cognizant of the fact that no plan for Afghanistan can work until and unless Pakistan is taken aboard in this regard. 4. World public opinion. The state, while formulating its foreign policy, has to take into account the world public opinion. World public opinion is more effective when it is supported by the domestic public opinion of the given state. Power is not about military hardware or nukes and ammunitions. Its equally important component is a state's prestige known as soft power. It is well known that the U.S. administration was made to effect changes in its Vietnam policy largely due to hostile world public opinion. The real strength behind the objectives of disarmament, control and nuclear disarmament, arms anti-colonialism, anti-apartheid policies of various nations, has been the world public opinion. 5. Alliances and treaties. The extensive and intensive system of alliances that emerged in the post-1945 period had a big impact on the foreign policies of all the nations. During 1945–90, both the United States and the USSR recognized and used alliances as the means for consolidating their respective positions. Their foreign policies, as well as the foreign policies of their allies, were always governed by the goal to secure new partners in their respective alliances and to maintain and consolidate the alliance partnerships. Even now, after the demise of Warsaw Pact, the USA continues to consider NATO as the mainstay of its foreign policy in Europe. NATO's support to the U.S. decision to declare a war against Taliban's Afghanistan decidedly gave strength to the U.S. foreign policy. However, many other nations, the non-aligned nations, still continue to regard alliances as a source of tension and distrust, and their foreign policies are still governed by the anti-alliance principle. Recently, another factor has become an influential factor in foreign policy making. the realization for mutual interdependence has given birth to a large number of regional organizations, arrangements, agreements and trading blocs. European Union, ASEAN, SAARC, NAFTA, APEC, SCO and several others have been major players in international economic relations. 6. Economic developmental needs. Pakistan and India are bargaining with Iran for the Iran-Pakistan-India, IPI, gas pipeline and with Turkmenistan for the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan-India, TAPI, gas pipeline project. Besides, a proposal for exporting gas from Qatar is also under consideration. India has received a big boost in this regard with the coming into force of the US-India deal on the peaceful nuclear technology. This has virtually legitimized Indian nuclear program, much to the chagrin of Pakistan, which has since been strenuously lobbying for getting the same status. Internal determinants. Cultural and historical traditions of a country, also foreign policy. 1. Historical and cultural influence. The deeply influenced, the generally people possessing a unified common culture and historical experience can pursue an effective foreign policy because of the support of all sections of society who share the same values and memories. Equally important are the processes through which the contents of shared norms and practices of society, as distinguished from the degree of unity that supports them, shape the plans that are made and the activities that are undertaken with respect to the external world. India's apprehensions of China and Pakistan are the product of their historical traditions. India and China have to some extent shelved their historical mistrust in order to pave ground for their mutual trade, believed by the complex interdependence theorists that in the present age of interdependence, it is highly improbable that the two countries would go to war. 2. Size and geography. The size of a state's territory, its population greatly influences its foreign policy. Generally, the leaders and people of countries with small territory and population do not expect their country to carry great weight in international affairs. On the other hand, the leaders and people of large countries are ready to assume special responsibilities. Size has been a factor in the foreign policies of the UBA, Russia, China, India, Brazil, France and others. However, sometimes even small states which have rich resources also leave a deep impact on world politics. For example, Britain, a small country, played leading role in world politics in the 19th and early 20th century. In our own times, the oil-rich countries of the Middle East, though small in size, are playing a significant role in international politics. On the other hand, large states like Canada and Australia have not been able to pursue effective foreign policy. The geography of a country, including its fertility, climate, location in relation to their landmasses, and waterways, etc., also influence the country's foreign policy. It is a major factor in determining self-sufficiency of a country. The role played by English Channel in the development of Britain as a major naval power and consequently as an imperial power is well known. The influence of the Atlantic Ocean on the U.S. foreign policy has been always there. Indian foreign policy now definitely bears the influence of the geographical location of India as the largest littoral state of the Indian Ocean. Generally, landlocked countries, nations in the tropics and those bordering a superpower are less self-sufficient in comparison to the countries which have access to warm water ports or are located in the temperate zones and far removed from superpowers. For example, in the 19th century, USA adopted isolationist policy chiefly on account of its geographical location. Though the importance of geographic factors is acknowledged almost at all hands, its importance has considerably declined due to technological and scientific developments. 3. Population. The human force constitutes another determinant of foreign policy. The strength of a nation depends upon the quality and quantity of its human factor. The enormous population of China enabled it to pursue a forceful foreign policy. On the other hand, the falling birth rate in France compelled her to toe a weak foreign policy during the interwar period. Qualitatively, the population should be healthy, educated and prosperous. It should also possess technical know-how. It is, however, to be noted that the population of a country has to be evaluated in relation to its other attributes. If the resources of a country are not sufficient to meet the requirements of the large population, the latter may pose a serious challenge to the very existence of the state. But if there are sufficient resources to meet the requirements of a large population, then it certainly adds to the power of the state. as this may enable it to mold its foreign policy accordingly. Instances from USA and the defunct Soviet Union's history can be quoted to substantiate this point. On the other side, if the state possesses sufficient natural resources but less population, then it may not be able to assert it. The example of Canada can be quoted in this respect. Canada has been pursuing a liberal immigration policy to overcome this deficiency. 4. Natural resources. The natural resources of country also profoundly influence determination of a foreign policy. The natural resources apart from minerals, gas and water resources also include the food grain. During the present century, food has tended to be an important factor in the determination of countries' foreign policy. It is said that during the Second World War the foreign and military polity of Germany was to a large extent determined by her limited food reserves. She resorted to massive action because she was to win a quick victory in view of the danger of starvation faced by the German army. In the post-World War II, our diplomacy in the Middle East has greatly determined foreign policy not only of the states of the region, but also of the entire world. The attitude of the superpowers during the Cold War, towards the region of the Middle East in particular, was to a large extent dictated by their desire to control the oil. We can say that the natural resources and raw material exercise considerable influence upon the foreign policy of a country. In the absence of a sound industrial complex, they can make a state vulnerable to foreign intervention, but with their domestic consumption and indigenous input, they can be a real boon for any country. In such a case, the state would pursue its foreign policy more confidently and assertively. 5. Economic and industrial development. The stage of economic development which a country has attained also has its impact on its foreign policy. Generally, the industrially advanced countries feel more deeply involved in relations with other countries because they have to import different kinds of raw materials and commodities from other countries. Again, an industrial country is expected to have a higher gross national product, GNP, and can devote greater funds for external purpose, economic aid program, military ventures and extensive diplomatic commitments. Advancement in technology, which affects the military and economic capabilities of a state, also exercises profound influence on the foreign policy. 6. Military power. Besides all the preceding factors, the military strength of a country also determines the effectiveness of its foreign policy. A state possessing sufficient military strength has greater initiative and bargaining power in the international arena. The case of Israel can be quoted as an example. She continues her precarious existence despite the combined opposition of the Allied nations. She has power to maintain assertive foreign policy. Unlike in geographical and natural resources, the military capacity is not a static factor. It keeps on changing. The states try to impress about their military superiority in a number of ways, such as nuclear tests, mobilization of army, periodical display of military forces, devices and techniques. Military strength of a country is closely linked to its resourcefulness and the development of its industry. A developed civil industry can be made to manufacture military hardware during the time of wars and crises. 7. National capacity. The national capacity of a state also exercises profound influence on the foreign policy of a state. National capacity of a state depends on its military preparedness, its technological advancement and economic development. It is well known that united to pursue policy of states which continued isolation till the beginning of the present century got deeply involved in the international arena in the present century mainly due to tremendous increase in her national capacity due to rapid economic development. Similarly, the foreign policy of Britain underwent great transformation in the post-World War II period, mainly due to decline in her national capacity. 8. Social structure. The social structure of a society also exercises profound influence on its foreign policy. A society which is sharply divided on the basis of wealth, religion, regional imbalances, etc., cannot pursue effective foreign policy on account of division and lack of cooperation among various groups. It is well known that Britain stood as one person under the leadership of Churchill during the Second World War, and the people gladly suffered all kinds of hardships to preserve their unity because of social solidarity. 9. Public opinion. Public mood is another important determinant of a country's foreign policy. Though public mood usually follows rather than guides the foreign policy-making process, It can exercise lot of influence on the determination of a foreign policy if the basic realignment in the prevailing great power structure takes place and the state becomes more involved or more isolated from the world affairs. It may be noted that generally in an authoritarian system the public mood does not influence the foreign policy, but in a democratic system based on political accountability, considerable weight has to be accorded to the changing public mood and sentiments. The American Senate's refusal to ratify the American membership of the League of Nations, and the opposition of Vietnam War by the Americans and other peoples, had a big impact on the foreign policy of the USA. 10. Political system. The political system found in a country also greatly influences the foreign policy. Generally, under authoritarian system, quick foreign policy decisions are possible because the decision-making power rests with an individual assisted by his clique. On the other hand, in a country possessing a democratic structure, the citizens can freely express their opinion on the domestic as well as foreign policy, which naturally leave its impact on the foreign policy of the country. 11. Role of press. The press contributes to this process by supplying factual information on the basis of which the people take decision by publishing specialized articles, current international developments. The press also plays an important role in publicizing the foreign policy of the country. The role of the press, however, depends on the political system prevailing in the country, the rate of literacy as well as the attitude of government. 12. Leadership. No doubt, the qualities of leadership have a deep impact on the country's foreign policy, but their role is greatly constrained by the governmental and social structure. Further, the role of leadership is not identical in all countries. In less developed countries, their role is greater as compared to industrialized societies. In industrialized societies, the individuals enjoy very limited discretion in high governmental and non-governmental positions. 13. Internal situation. Like the external situational factors, sudden changes, disturbances or disorders that occur within the internal environment of a nation also influence the nature and course of foreign policy. The resignation of President Nixon over the issue of Watergate scandal considerably limited the foreign policy of USA under President Ford. The internal opposition to the military regime in Pakistan during 1947–89 was a determinant of Pakistani foreign policy. Similarly, the declaration of emergency in India in 1975 did materially affect the relations of India with the other countries, particularly the superpowers. A change of government is always a source of change in the foreign policy of a state. 14. Personalities of leaders. Since the foreign policy of a nation is made and implemented by leaders, statesmen and diplomats, naturally it bears imprint of their values, talents, and experiences and personalities. The ideas, orientations, likings, disliking, attitudes, knowledge, skill and the worldview of the national decision-makers are influential inputs of foreign policy. The differences among the leaders are also influential inputs of a foreign policy. The differences between the foreign policy decisions of various U.S. presidents have been due to the differences in their attitudes, personalities. The Indian foreign policy till 1964 and was often, and rightly so, described as Nehru's foreign policy. The support at home and the popularity that PM Nehru enjoyed acted as imputes of foreign policy. However, leaders are always guided by the dictates and demands of national interest. Each leader is national interest. National interest means desires on the part of sovereign states. National interest is what a nation feels to be necessary to its security and well-being. It reflects the general and continuing ends for which a nation acts. Components. There are following two components of national interest. A. Necessary or vital components. The vital components of the national interests that a foreign policy seeks to secure are survival or identity. He subdivides identity into three parts: physical identity, political identity and cultural identity. Physical identity includes territorial identity. Political identity means politico-economic system, and cultural identity stands for historical values that are upheld by a nation as part of its cultural heritage. These are called vital components because these are essential for the survival of the nation and can be easily identified and examined. A nation even decides to go to war for securing or protecting her vital interests. A nation always formulates its foreign policy decisions with a view to secure and strengthens its security. The attempts to secure international peace and security that nations are currently making are being made because today the security of each state stands inseparably linked up with international peace and security. Security is, thus, a vital component of national interest. Each nation always tries to secure its vital interests even by means of war. b. Non-vital variable components of or national interest. The non-vital components are those parts of national interest which are determined either by circumstances or by the necessity of securing the vital components. These are determined by a host of factors: the decision-makers, public opinion, party politics, sectional or group interests, and political and moral folkways. These variable interests are those desires of individual states which they would, no doubt, like to see fulfilled but for which they will not go to war. Whereas the vital interests may be taken as goals, the secondary interests may be termed as objectives of foreign policy. These objectives includes prosperity, peace, ideology, justice, prestige, aggrandizement and power. Though each state defines these objectives in a manner which suits its interests in changing circumstances, yet these objectives can be described as common to almost all states. Thus, national interest which a nation seeks to secure can be generally categorized into these two parts. Classification of national interests. In order to be more precise in examining the interest which a committed to the securing of national interests of the nation. The vital interests of the nations are a source of continuity if the personalities and attitudes of the leaders are a source of change. The two have to be balanced before these serve as foreign policy inputs. Nation seeks to secure. Thomas Robinson presents a six-fold classification of W interests which nations try to secure. 1. The primary interests. These are those interests in respect of which no nation can compromise. It includes the preservation of physical, political and cultural identity against possible encroachments by other states. A state has to defend these at all costs. 2. Secondary interests. These are less important than the primary interests. Secondary interests are quite vital for the existence of the state. This includes the protection of the citizens abroad and ensuring of diplomatic immunities for the diplomatic staff. 3. Permanent interests. These refer to the relatively constant long-term interests of the state. These are subject to very slow changes. The U.S. interest to preserve its spheres of influence and to maintain freedom of navigation in all the oceans is the examples of such interests. 4. Variable interests. Such interests are those interests of a nation which are considered vital for national good in a given set of circumstances. In this sense, these can diverge from both primary and permanent interests. The variable interests are largely determined by the cross-currents of personalities, public opinion, sectional interests, partisan politics and political and moral folkways. 5. The general interests. General interests of a nation refer to those positive conditions which apply to a large number of nations or in several specified fields such as economic, trade, diplomatic relations, etc. To maintain international peace is a general interest of all the nations. Similar is the case of disarmament and arms control. 6. Specific interests. These are the logical outgrowths of the general interests, and these are defined in terms of time and space. To secure the economic rights of the Third World countries through the securing of a new international economic order is a specific interest of India and other developing countries. International interests. Besides these 6 categories of national interest, T.W. Robinson also refers to 3 international interests: identical interests, complementary interests and conflicting interests. First category includes those interests which are common to a large number of states. The second category refers to those interests, who though not identical, can form the basis of agreement on some specific issues. And the third category includes those interests which are neither complementary nor identical. However, this classification is neither absolute nor complete. The complementary interests can, with the passage of time, become identical interests, and conflicting interests can become complementary interests. Methods for the securing national interest. To secure the goals and objectives of its national interest is the paramount right and duty of every nation. Nations are always at work to secure their national interests, and in doing so they adopt a number of methods. These 5 popular methods are as follows. 1. Diplomacy as a means of national interests. Diplomacy is a universally accepted means for securing national interests. It is through diplomacy that the foreign policy of a nation travels to other nations. It seeks to secure the goals of national interests. Diplomats establish contacts with the decision-makers and diplomats of other nations and conduct negotiations for achieving the desired goals and objectives of national interests of their nation. The art of diplomacy involves the presentation of the goals and objectives of national interest in such a way as can persuade others to accept these as just and rightful demands of the nation. Diplomats use persuasion and threats, rewards and threats of denial of rewards as the means for exercising power and securing goals of national interest as defined by foreign policy of their nation. Diplomatic negotiations constitute the most effective means of conflict resolution and for reconciling the divergent interests of the state. Through mutual give and take, accommodation and reconciliation, diplomacy tries to secure the desired goals and objectives of national interest. As an instrument of securing national interest, diplomacy is a universally recognized and most frequently used means. Morgenthau regards diplomacy as the most primary means. However, all the objectives and goals of national interest cannot be secured through diplomacy. 2. Propaganda. The second important method for securing national interest. 18. Propaganda. Propaganda is the art of salesmanship. It is the art of convincing others about the justness of the goals and objectives or ends which are desired to be secured. It consists of the attempt to impress upon nations the necessity of securing the goals which a nation wishes to achieve. Propaganda is a systematic attempt to affect the minds, emotions and actions of a given group for a specific public purpose. Frankel, it is directly addressed to the people of other states and its aim is always to secure the interests which are governed exclusively by the national interests of the propagandist. The revolutionary development of the means of communications, Internet, in the recent times has increased the scope of propaganda as a means for securing support for goals of national interest. 3. Economic means. The rich and developed nations use economic aid and loans as the means for securing their interests in international relations. The existence of a very wide gap between the rich and poor countries provides a big opportunity to the rich nations for promoting their interests vis-à-vis the poor nations. The dependence of the poor and lowly developed nations upon the rich and developed nations for the import of industrial goods, technological know-how, foreign aid, armaments and for selling raw materials has been responsible for strengthening the role of economic instruments of foreign policy. In this era of globalization, conduct of international economic relation has emerged as a key means of national interests. 4. Alliances and treaties. Alliances and treaties are concluded by two or more states for securing their common interests. This device is mostly used for securing identical and complementary interests. However, even conflictual interests may lead to alliances and treaties with like-minded states against the common rivals or opponents. Alliances and treaties make it a legal obligation for the members of the alliances or signatories of the treaties to work for the promotion of agreed common interests. The alliances may be concluded for serving a particular specific interest or for securing a number of common interests. The nature of an alliance depends upon the nature of interest which is sought to be secured. Accordingly, the alliances are either military or economic in nature. The need for securing the security of capitalist democratic states against the expanding communist menace led to the creation of military alliances like NATO, CETO, CENTO, ANZUS, etc. Likewise, the need to meet the threat to socialism led to the conclusion of Warsaw Pact among the communist countries. The need for the economic reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War led to the establishment of European Common Market, now European Union, and several other economic agencies. The needs of Indian national interests in 1971 led to the conclusion of the Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation with the erstwhile Soviet Union. Alliances and treaties are thus popular means for securing national interests. 5. Coercive means. The role of power. 221 International relations is a recognized fact. It is an unwritten law of international intercourse that nations can use force for securing their national interests. International law also recognizes coercive means short of war as the methods that can be used by states for fulfilling their desired goals and objectives. Intervention, non-intercourse, embargoes, boycotts, reprisals, retortion, retaliation, severance of relations and Pacific biocides are the popular coercive means which can be used by a nation to force others to accept a particular course of behavior or to refrain from a course which is considered harmful by the nation using coercive means. War and aggression have been declared illegal means, yet these continue to be used by the states in actual course of international relations. Today, nations fully realize the importance of peaceful means of conflict resolution like negotiations, and diplomacy as the ideal methods for promoting their national interests. Yet at the same time these continue to use coercive means, whenever they find it expedient and necessary. Military power is still regarded as a major part of national power and is often used by a nation for securing its desired goals and objectives. The use of military power against international terrorism now stands universally accepted as a natural and just means for fighting the menace. Today, world public opinion accepts the use of war and other forcible means for the elimination of international terrorism. All these means are used by all the nations for securing their national interests. Nations have the right and duty to secure their national interests, and they have the freedom to choose the requisite means for this purpose. They can use peaceful or coercive means as and when they may desire or deem essential. However, in the interest of international peace, security and prosperity, nations are expected to diplomacy. The negotiation between two countries to achieve their desired ends is called diplomacy. It is a tool to shape foreign policy. Diplomacy is not just negotiation, but many times it includes effective bargaining also. It is a tool to increase mutual trust and understanding on any particular issue. So, diplomats are recruited and trained to run such diplomacy. Diplomacy as a tool can further be classified as traditional diplomacy, like Track 1, Track 2, etc. and non-traditional diplomacy like multi-track, back-channel, and digital diplomacy. Earlier, diplomacy used to be a secret affair and diplomats had exclusive power for diplomacy. Diplomats had greater leeway to negotiate without the pressure of public opinion and media. But today diplomacy is an open affair. It is no more secret affair and no more exclusive power of negotiating diplomats to take decisions. 24x7 media, social networking sites and internet are constantly feeding the public with all possible angles in a negotiation and all possible trade-offs. Track I diplomacy is an official format carried out by government officials. Track 2 is different from Track I in form that it is carried out by non-government officials like business delegation, retired officers, student groups, cultural groups etc., but it is backed by government. Gunboat diplomacy is direct manifestation of power by one party of negotiation to pressurize other party to obtain predetermined outcomes. Suez Canal Crisis, 1956, was an example of gunboat diplomacy when threat of hard power was used by France and England against Egypt to obtain the desired trade-offs. This is also a kind of coercive diplomacy. Dollar, domestic currency of USA, is also an international currency and using power of dollar to refrain from using coercive means particular war and aggression. These are expected to depend upon peaceful means for the settlement of disputes and for securing their interests. While formulating the goals and objectives of national interest, all the nations must make honest attempts to make these compatible with the international interests of peace, security, environmental protection, protection of human rights and sustainable development. Peaceful coexistence, peaceful conflict resolution and purposeful mutual cooperation for development are the common and shared interests of all the nations. As such, along with the promotion of their national interests, the nations must try to protect and promote common interests in the larger interest of the whole international community. All this makes it essential for every nation to formulate its foreign policy, and to conduct its relations with other nations on the basis of its national interests, as interpreted and defined in harmony with the common interests of the humankind. The aim of foreign policy is to secure the defined goals of national interest by the use of the national power. Carry out diplomatic negotiation is called dollar diplomacy. Digital diplomacy has already shown its power in democratic movements in Arabian Peninsula and Northern Africa. It is said that it was a series of revolution done by use of Facebook, Twitter and BlackBerry services. So era of internet and social media has constricted the space for Track I diplomacy and thus created many other aspects of diplomacy. When no direct negotiation is possible between the two countries, then diplomats utilize back-channel tools to fulfill diplomatic aspirations. Here no formal talks are held, but diplomats of both countries meet together informally, away from media glare, and try to get an assessment of prevailing situation and know the opinion of other as well. It is known as back-channel diplomacy and can be considered as preparatory step for direct diplomacy. Success of diplomacy. We cannot have a mathematical formula to judge success or non-success of diplomacy. It always depends on the context and prevailing situation. The ultimate success lies with the fact that it must protect and promote the national interest. New Age diplomacy. Era of information communication technology has brought a quantum shift in way diplomacy used to be carried out traditionally. These days, nothing remains secret and clandestine regarding foreign policy and negotiation that led to emergence of Track-I diplomacy tracked by government. Cricket, willow diplomacy, social networking sites and increased contact and cooperation at economic, political and cultural level are becoming new tools. Power of these tools were quite evident in recent crisis of Middle Coast and North Africa, in economic crisis, in improving relation of India vis Pakistan, Bangladesh etc. Even diplomats are feeling an ease to carry out successful negotiation. But at the end what ultimately matters is the successful promotion and protection of national, and it is immaterial whether it is fulfilled in traditional way or by neo-diplomatic tools available at our handout. Emergence of ICT. New Age diplomacy is more concerned about synthesizing an effective public diplomacy. Diplomacy later became identified with international relations, and the direct tie to documents lapsed, except in diplomatic, which are the science of authenticating old official documents. Diplomacy versus foreign policy. Diplomacy is often confused with foreign policy, but the terms are not synonymous. Diplomacy is the chief, but not the only, instrument of foreign policy, which is set by political leaders, though diplomats, in addition to military and intelligence officers, may advise them. Foreign policy establishes goals, prescribes strategies, and sets the broad tactics to be used in their accomplishment. Diplomacy is the principal substitute for the use of force or underhanded means in statecraft. It is how comprehensive national power is applied to the peaceful adjustment of differences between states. It may be coercive, i.e., backed by the threat to apply punitive measures or to use force, but is overtly nonviolent. Its primary tools are international dialogue and negotiation, primarily conducted by accredited envoys and other political leaders. Unlike foreign policy, which generally is enunciated publicly, most diplomacy is conducted in confidence, though both the fact that it is in progress and its results are almost always made public in contemporary relations. The purpose of foreign policy is to further a state's interests, which are derived from geography, history, economics, and the distribution of international power. The political leaders, traditionally of sovereign states, who devise foreign policy, pursue what they perceive to be the national interest, adjusting national policies to changes in external conditions and technology. Primary responsibility for supervising the execution of policy may lie with the head of state or government, a cabinet, or a nominally non-governmental collective leadership. The purpose of diplomacy is to strengthen the state, nation, or organization it serves in relation to others by advancing the interests in its charge. To this end, diplomatic activity endeavors to maximize a group's advantages without the risk and expense of using force, and preferably without causing resentment. It habitually, but not invariably, strives to preserve peace. Diplomacy is strongly inclined toward negotiation to achieve agreements and resolve issues between states. Even in times of peace, diplomacy may involve coercive threats of economic or other punitive measures or demonstrations of the capability to impose unilateral solutions to disputes by the application of military power. However, diplomacy normally seeks to develop goodwill toward the state it represents, nurturing relations with foreign states and peoples that will ensure cooperation or failing that their neutrality. Their conclusion. It is clear from the above discussion that foreign policy of a country is determined by a number of factors. As most of these factors are of changing nature, so with their evolution or transformation, foreign policies of countries also keep on changing. In addition to these factors, certain developments at the international level, such as development of thermonuclear technology, onset of Cold War and military alliances, elimination of colonialism, have exercised profound influence on the foreign policies of different countries. The creation of United Nations has also left a mark on the foreign policies of different countries. The end of Cold War influenced the states in every region of the world to modify their foreign policies in according with the changing dynamics of the world. Post 9/11 has a similar effect on the states. Diplomats are the primary but far from the only practitioners of diplomacy. They are specialists in carrying messages and negotiating adjustments in relations and the resolution of quarrels between states and peoples. Their weapons are words, backed by the power of the state or organization they represent. Diplomats help leaders to understand the attitudes and actions of foreigners and to develop strategies and tactics that will shape the behavior of foreigners, especially foreign governments. The wise use of diplomats is a key to successful foreign policy.